but if you have sort of a realistic approach and you balance emotion and fact, those are the most successful attorneys. And I think that's the most successful appeal to a jury, because jurors have to care about their verdict. They want to see passion from the attorneys, but they don't want to see people over the top.
Welcome to a special edition of Surviving the Survivor, the Dan Markel murder with Karm on Crime.
So, Carmela, we continue to have an incredible response to the Dan Markel murder case. Just more and more interest. It's not surprising because this has obviously become a internationally renowned murder case. And of course, Charlie Adelson, the ex-brother-in-law of Dan Markel, is set to go on trial sometime in early 2023. And so today we bring to the show another brilliant legal mind who actually was an assistant state attorney in Tallahassee, and he is the great Jeremy Mutz. I'm going to just tell people about him really quickly. He specializes in criminal defense, family law, and divorce law. As I mentioned, he has strong Tallahassee ties, having attended FSU School of Law, where, of course, Dan Markel was a professor. Jeremy did work as an assistant state attorney, where he prosecuted domestic batteries, violations of injunctions, DUIs, and serious felonies in both Tallahassee and Apalachicola. Hope I said that correctly. And he now has a private practice in Shipley. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. So, obvious first question is, you're working in the state attorney's office. You never worked directly on the case, but what kind of intrigued you about the Dan Markel murder?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor. I really didn't want to be involved in the case. I had my own duties, supervising some of the younger lawyers and handling homicide case of my own. But being in the office, being a Tallahassee resident, this shocked me like it did anybody else. It certainly fascinated me. It's truly a mystery, and truly, in the beginning, it was a mystery and something that you could not make up. I mean, fiction writers, the Lincoln lawyer novels really can't eclipse this case. So it was fascinating to me, but I really didn't want to be involved in it. My involvement came really sort of being a front row spectator, not really wanting to be that. But being in the office, I was there when the elected state attorney, Willie Meggs, made statements about the case in front of me, made statements within the office that other people that I trusted as reliable related back to me because of concerns they had about how the case was being handled. So I sort of took note of those things and made mental notes of those things and written notes, because the case was just an important thing. There was no more serious case, certainly in Tallahassee during the time I was there.
And when it happened when he was murdered in 2014, and it was originally a real mystery before we then went on to find out that it was that now the Adelsons, the in-laws, and Charlie Adelson, the former brother-in-law, has now been indicted and is awaiting trial on a murder charge, and the two hitmen have been convicted, and now Katie Magbanua, the intermediary, has been convicted as well. But back in 2014, how do you remember it gripping the city?
Well, the fact that somebody could really just come in and slip out of town like a ghost without anybody even seeing them and just shoot somebody in the driveway of their home. In a nice neighborhood, a man that had was the father of two young children, a professional. It's kind of everybody's worst nightmare. So I think it really hits close to home. The fact that you think, well, I've worked hard and I've got a home in a nicer area, and this couldn't happen to me. The fact that it is a mystery, I think at that time, everybody loves a mystery, and this was a true whodunit. We had no idea, who did it at the time. So it scared people, and really just shook people's attention. I mean, you could kind of look at any other case that's truly a mystery that shocked people. You know, the Lindbergh case, for example, something like that, where it truly just hits you that, you know, somebody could slip into a house and do something and slip away and never be seen again. And then when the Prius tip came out, I mean, that just stirred up people's imagination, because it's kind of like this car could slip in there and slip away. It's a common car in Tallahassee, so I think that kind of you know, just people just got swept up in it, you know, understandably so.
And has there been maybe one thing about this case that has really surprised you? Has anything jumped out at you over the years that, you know, you kind of always look back to?
I don't know if I could say any one thing. I feel like the slow pace to go forward with the case originally, which was kind of what heightened my concerns. It was kind of what raised alarm bells with me initially. I mean, I think it was surprising that Katie Magbanua was a hung jury the first time around. I was surprised that Charlie Adelson was charged ultimately when he did. That came as a surprise.
Why was that a surprise? Because I thought a lot of people were expecting him to kind of go down. Why did that surprise you?
I always had concerns all along that they might stop with the low-hanging fruit, Rivera, Garcia, Magbanua, that if they got those individuals, that they would stop due to the admitted difficulty in going further, in the sort of lack of a real driving need to go forward. Unlike a case like the Gary Hilton case or something like that, where obviously that was going to be a trial. He's a serial killer. You know, they're not going to, you know, decide not to charge him. I mean, they're going to go forward with it. But now that they have Charlie, do you think that prosecution? We've had Georgia Kappelman on, but now that they've got Charlie incarcerated, do you think the case against him is strong enough that they're going to have a fairly easy win here? I don't think it'll be easy, but I do think the case is very strong. I think Mr. Adelson has hired a very skilled team of attorneys, you know, the Mr. Marcus and the people that work with him. They're not going to make it easy. I think I posted somewhere maybe on Facebook that attorneys at that level, they don't even think about losing. They don't play to lose. They don't even have that in their vocabulary. So they're going to do everything they can to try to create reasonable doubt, try to exploit any weakness or confusion in the case, try to confuse the issues. So it's going to be difficult. I think Georgia and the people working with her are some of the best in the state. I think Georgia's probably one of the top 5 prosecutors in the state. So she's got a good case. She will try it well. I felt like the reason that she was able to prevail in the second trial of Miss Magbanua is that they worked really hard to present a better case. And, you know, sometimes there's a tendency that we try a case and have to retry it. We do the same thing again. You really can't do that. You need to start over like it's a brand new case. And I think that's what she did, and went out and tried to get evidence retested and things like that. I think if they take that same approach again with Mr. Adelson, they've got a good chance of winning, but it's not going to be easy.
You're in an interesting position because you've been on both sides of the fence. You're an assistant state attorney, and now you're a defense attorney. And you talked about, you know, these defense attorneys, especially at the level that these guys are on, defending Charlie Adelson. They're going to try to confuse the jury and raise that reasonable doubt. If you were defending Charlie, what would your first tactic be, or what would your main tactic be?
Well, I think I would really try to attack the fact that he wasn't charged all these years. I think I would attack the very highly circumstantial nature of the case. That there's no direct evidence of him going to Tallahassee or paying money to Mr. Rivera, Mr. Garcia, where we're talking about sort of a web of circumstantial connections and phone calls and time frames that put people in sort of a web of connectivity, but there's not a direct link between them. There's also not a direct motive for him to kill anyone. So it's sort of, you create reasonable doubt by saying, well, did his sister contact Katie herself and do these things without him? There's a number of things you can do just to sort of make the jurors distrust the state and look elsewhere. Now I think the state has a good case, a strong case, but I think they will put up a one heck of a fight.
We had Fancy Fiction on, who's she's been on top of this case from the get-go, and she's got a YouTube channel. Shout out to Fancy, and she's been posting all the she's FOIA'd all the wiretaps. Will Charlie's own words potentially doom him in a court?
Well, she makes some great points, and she's probably dived into the content of that evidence more than anybody has. I mean, I think they can. I think his attitude maybe would sink him more than anything. And y'all have talked about this very well in terms of what his arrogance is, and you've had other guests on here to talk about that. That may well sink him more than his actual words, because there's absolutely nothing to suggest any sorrow for what happened or remorse. It's all just this attitude of, I'm who I am and I'm going to get away with what I want to. And, I don't think he'll impress the jury as much as he thinks he may in his mind.
We've had Karm, you've been silent, so why don't you hop in here, Karm?
I thought if you were a bookie in Las Vegas, how much would you bet on? I mean, what would you bet if you can bet 100 chips that he will be indicted, convicted? He's indicted now, convicted, and 100 that he will not. Where would you how would you place your bet on him? Because I am not even hearing most people who are logical and so forth about this are so talking each other into the fact that he will be convicted. But the reality is that with a very astute lawyer, if it doesn't fit, don't whatever.
The glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. The old OJ. So Karm's question is,
yes.
You have 100 chips on the table. How many are you putting in favor of the state, and how many are you putting in favor of the defense?
I'd put 60 in favor of the state, 40 for the defense.
50-40.
That's something that most people who are, the chatter about this and the reporting and the conversations and the YouTube, most people, it's almost like we can't even talk of the possibility that in the end he will not.
Well, I think that's an important point. I think
that's different.
There's obviously 99.97%, if not more, of the people that tune into our show are pro Markel, right? Which how can you not be? The guy was murdered, right? But emotion dictates a lot. But Jeremy, when you're in a courtroom, what part of emotion plays a part in the jury's decision versus the skillfulness of a really top-notch defense attorney. So what, you can't just depend on emotion, correct?
No, you can't. You can't. There's a combination of both. And, I think the most successful defense lawyers and the most successful prosecutors are very realistic people. Sometimes in the profession, you'll hear the term true believer. Sometimes you could hear of a true believer defense attorney or a true believer prosecutor. If you believe all your clients are innocent and angels, you're often going to miss a weakness in your case. If you're a prosecutor and you think everybody's guilty and just send them all to prison, you'll probably miss a weakness in your case. But if you have sort of a realistic approach and you balance emotion and fact, those are the most successful attorneys. And I think that's the most successful appeal to a jury, because jurors have to care about their verdict. They want to see passion from the attorneys, but they don't want to see people over the top. And so I think the reason I say there is a chance that he's found not guilty is because if that attorney is able to passionately defend him, cast reasonable doubt, and make it look like Rivera is really the bad guy, even hint or suggest that Wendy orchestrated this without Charlie, that Katie might have done this, that Lewis and Rivera, Garcia and Rivera may have done this to blackmail Charlie, who is known as a big spender, a flamboyant person in the clubs in that scene. There are a number of things that can be done that if they have enough facts to make it look reasonable. We saw it in the Katie Magbanua trial the first time around, how that interplay of fact and emotion swayed a couple of the jurors because they felt like, well, maybe she did do this, but why is she the only person here been charged? And that appeal to their emotions was successful. I think Ms. Kawas was probably the biggest proponent of that.
Is there any chance that there's going to be a change of venue request by the defense? Because obviously everyone up in Tallahassee knows about this case. Do you think the defense will move for a change of venue?
That might be a strategy they pursue. I don't think it's really a great strategy because just in the last trial they were able to get a jury that hadn't hyper focused on the trial. I mean, obviously, the three of us would not be allowed on there because they're going to say y'all have, followed this thing. But they're gonna get a panel, and I think it's going to be hard to convince Judge Wheeler or another judge if it spills over into another judge's term. It's going to be very hard to get them to change venue. It's not such a case that presents factors that are that prejudicial to the accused. It's not a mass murder type situation or a terrorism type situation that I think you would have to really have that level of prejudice to be successful. That being said, they could file almost anything. Ms. Kawas filed a motion to recuse Ms. Kappelman, and they can file things sometimes that they may or may not have a strong hope of prevailing on.
Did I understand it correctly? That was interesting to me. You said that one of the things they look on the motivation of Charles Adelson, and they looking at it from the outside objectively, he is not the most hurt by the divorce and by the relationship between, so that Wendy has more of a motivation to have him killed than Charlie. Did I understand this correctly?
Yes, ma'am. That's right. I don't think it's a very strong argument, but I think it may be an argument that they could try, because how many how many brothers murder for their sister's custody battle. You might have a spouse murder another spouse or hire that done. That's more within the common understanding of what happens in the world. We might have grandparents. There have been a number of cases where grandparents have driven the hiring and commission of a murder to secure the custody of their grandchildren. It's almost like they care more about it than the parent.
Jeremy, it's ironic that came up because just last night, Karm, you said you'd murder for me. So I feel good. Arden, I hope you would do the same.
This case has the grandparent as a possible motivator, right? Donna, the grandmother, right?
It's a huge part of this, and I think it's a way. If Charlie's strategy might be to distance and put daylight between him and the murder, he could say that the mother had more of an interest in this. There's no evidence. She's not been charged. The sister, Wendy, has more. There's more motive. She's not been charged. I mean, they'd have to look at everything. And that's something I'm sure is being done because an attorney as skilled as that representing Mr. Adelson, he's realistically looking at this case. I mean, he's realistically looking that his client could be convicted, but he's going to do everything he can possibly do to prevent that. And if that means throwing other people under the bus, he can. But the grandparent motivation is huge because there have been a number of grandparents that have committed homicides. They offered $1 million to basically buy out Dan Markel at one point. Yes. And I don't know about where the Adelsons live, but where I come from, $1 million is a lot of money. So, to say $1 million to go away, that shows the level of intensity that they wanted this. And Plan B is not too far away in the level of intensity. You got $1 million on the one hand versus murder on the other.
I find it very interesting, your perspective. I find it very interesting.
Two quick questions for you. Number one, all these wiretaps that the Wizard of Wiretappery, fancy fiction, has dug up through these FOIAs. Number one, are they going to be admissible, do you think, in the trial? And number two, I listened again to a bunch of these, and this is my own personal opinion. I think that there is a better than 60% chance, again, this is my own opinion, that Charlie flips, at least on Wendy, because he's very narcissistic, in my opinion, very egomaniacal, and he looked like crap when you saw him coming out of jail, and I don't think he enjoys being there. So again, will they be admissible, and do you think that Charlie could flip on either Donna or Wendy?
I'm pretty sure the state would seek to admit them, and as long as they can authenticate them, I don't see any problem with them being admitted. The big challenge is to not inundate the jury with too much of those. I think part of the issue with the first Magna Nua trial is that there were maybe too many emails entered into evidence. It got to be overwhelming. I think the state did a much better job the second time around and just zeroing in on the most important pieces. It's hard to get into somebody's head like Mr. Adelson. He's somebody that enjoys a big lifestyle. He's somebody who enjoys going to clubs, different girlfriend every other week, nice cars, enjoys being the periodontist in the community. It is going to be rough on him to be in jail. How strong is his family loyalty? That's going to be the question. And you could see some things behind the scenes possibly playing out where he makes some contacts with the state. Perhaps he agrees to cooperate, and perhaps he agrees to do something that might see him and his mother do some time in exchange for Wendy staying free to raise her sons. There's a number of things that could be explored by his lawyers for him. They don't all involve just throwing his family under the bus. There might be some middle ground. Is kind of what I would expect.
Karm, you can tell that Jeremy and I are different personality types. Jeremy is a very measured, very thoughtful person, unlike myself. So he's thinking this through. Jeremy, the Arthur hearing is just around the corner. And it appears that they're obviously going to ask for Charlie to be freed pending the trial. What are you expecting from this hearing?
Well, I'm expecting that Judge Wheeler will be very judicious and very much what you'd want a judge to be. He will listen to all the evidence. I think he will probably give a very detailed ruling. I don't expect it to succeed, given the level of seriousness, given the disparity between the treatment of Miss Magbanua, who I think spent something like 4 or 5 years in jail awaiting trial and retrial, and also the treatment of other homicide defendants similarly situated. I can only think of one other case in Leon County, and that was the the Samara Thrash murder, where the accused was let out of jail pending trial. So it's very rare in this jurisdiction to see release pending a first degree or even a second degree murder trial. So I don't expect it to go anywhere. I think it'll be interesting, certainly, to follow and see what the arguments are. Again, I think they have some good arguments to make on the defense side, in the sense that, he has had 8 years to flee, and he has not done that. My argument to that as a prosecutor will be, well, he hadn't been charged. Now he's got a real stake in sitting around. If he decides to go to a jurisdiction where they won't extradite him, it's really, the opportunity means something now. The opportunity didn't really mean anything in June of 2016. But he has some arguments to make. I just don't think it's going to be successful.
And Jeremy, so again, you were on both sides, on the state side and now your criminal defense. Tell us, the trial, the main event, not the Arthur hearing, the main event is set for sometime January 2023 through March is the prediction. The great John Singer, who we've had on, thinks it's going to be pushed closer to summertime, so we'll see. But what today, in late August, what is Georgia Kappelman and her team doing on a daily basis, and what's the defense team? I mean, like you said, which I thought was really interesting also, and you said it in passing, that the prosecution wouldn't want to present too many wiretaps because it'll overwhelm the jury pool. So what is their day-to-day like right now in preparing for this case on either side?
Well, there might be some days where their duties take them away from this case completely. That's really the challenge of being a prosecutor and defense attorney as well. She probably has a dozen other cases that she's working on. She probably has supervisory duties at the office, but I'm sure they're working on possibly interviewing new witnesses, if there are any, how they introduce these wiretaps, like you said, whether there's any additional testing they may need to have done. They may have investigators going out and trying to locate witnesses that have moved. They may be just organizing materials for the trial.
Are they listening to podcasts? Not ours necessarily, but are they listening to, because like Fancy Fiction has a lot of interesting stuff. Are they checking those sites out?
I would say some of the prosecutors are. They probably don't spend a lot of time.
Their life on it.
Well, just because some of the felony prosecutors, they're in court almost every day.
Mm.
Defense attorneys as well. So, but I'm sure they do because sometimes the key to success as a trial lawyer is humility, in the sense that other people may have some ideas and some thoughts that you haven't thought of, and it's worthwhile. I think sometimes looking at the media, looking at podcasters. I mean, I have to say, in this case, I think some of the podcasters and some of the people that have been in the public, Justice for Dan and so forth, are a large degree responsible for the charges going forward on Charlie Adelson. I think you and others have sort of kept the case alive. And while the petition to bring more charges and things like that were discounted, I mean, any elected prosecutor is going to say that. They're going to say, well, we don't charge people because of a petition. But I think the aggregate effect of people really being concerned about this case and really upset about it, I think has helped.
Plus, there's going to be a 2-hour Dateline coming out in the fall. I understand there might be another series coming out, so there's going to be a lot more attention brought to the case.
But wait 1 second. It's very interesting that, correct me if I understood it correctly, you said something like there was even that possibility between 2014 and now, at one moment, that they'll just take care of the low-hanging fruit, meaning Magbanua, Garcia, and Rivera, and then they let the Adelsons let them float away?
I think there was a strong possibility of that. I think that was a strong concern that I had, and more importantly than my opinion, some of the investigators with the police department had that concern.
Well,
and in the beginning,
that possible?
How's it possible? He just explained it's not based on emotion. It's based on evidence and what they can present to a jury, right, Jeremy?
No, it's political too.
Oh, and political, Jeremy.
You know, you would like to think it's just based on the evidence and the facts, but Tallahassee is a very political place. And, you know, any district attorney's office or state attorney's office, there's a certain amount of politics involved. But in the Tallahassee office, there's a lot of politics involved, and there, you know, has been for a long time. But I think, you know, you could look at that and give them the benefit of the doubt that they wanted to be cautious. But I think there's something else to it. And, you know, maybe you could say it was a fear to go up against the level of attorneys that were going to come at them and now are. Because if you look back at just the facts, back in May of 2016, when I first heard about this, and it sort of piqued my interest, you know, raised red flags, if you will. Our elected state attorney didn't want to approve the search warrants initially.
Interesting. Jeremy, do me.
That's an important fact.
Yeah, very important. Will you indulge us? We've got some, actually a decent amount, but we'll fly through these. Some viewer comments and questions. The first one here is just a comment, but this actually affected me as a father of 3. Comes from Jessica Trimbath. She says, what grips me about this case is it's one of the most heartbreaking and senseless things I've ever heard of. I can count at least 10 children who've had their parents either murdered or taken into jail. 2 boys forever cut off from the love and life force and empowering history of their father and what his unconditional, loving, and caring presence would have meant in their lives. What words are big enough to name this kind of loss? And several other children are now living without a parent or both parents because all the players were unthinkably greedy and evil. It's so senseless, stupid, sad, and infuriating. Carmela, does that resonate with you?
Yeah.
On to the next comment. Coming here, we've got a bunch, Jeremy, so I want to try to run through these because I know your time is both costly and important to you. So Maureen Casey, if I'm pronouncing that right, I think Charlie will spill the beans. He talks way too much and will let it out to someone in prison. He's probably suffering from substance abuse withdrawal, and this will make him careless. He's in jail, to be accurate about this. But what say you, Jeremy? You think that there's, by the way, there's been interesting, everyone is online, everyone is an attorney, either a prosecutor or defense attorney, but people have said that Charlie was abusing steroids, and that could even be one of the defenses, that he was in some sort of steroid rage. Do you think that even comes up in the trial? Would the defense even postulate that for some reason?
Well, they may try. I think the state would be able to successfully diffuse that or even keep it out entirely, because in Florida we follow the McNaughton test. You have to, the standard is whether you know right from wrong. There's not really a diminished capacity type defense legally in Florida. If you knew right from wrong, you can be guilty of homicide. I really don't think he's going to flip. I think, if anything, he might try to explore some sort of a deal. If Donna and Charlie think that they have to do some time to save Wendy, that might be something that happens. I don't see him turning on his sister, but I can't get inside his head and read his thoughts. If I could do that, I probably would have a Ferrari and big yachts.
Karm, would you do time for me, Karm? Would you do hard time?
I would do time for you.
Thanks, Karm. I'd do the same. The family bond is strong.
See you next time. We're going to jail.
This one, William Powers. He is a very intelligent guy, commenting frequently on our channel. As John Singer states, Charlie Adelson incriminated himself on the Dolce Vita surveillance recording, even when his mother, Donna, first called him to inform of what now is referred to as the FBI bump. Charlie behaved immaturely. Donna multiple times told Charlie, let's talk in person, not on the phone, but Charlie persisted in requesting more details. Do you think that Dolce Vita tape is going to be his undoing, potentially, Jeremy?
Oh, I think it'll be a big part of it. That and a few other things. I've said for several years, innocent people, if they're confronted with law enforcement or somebody trying to blackmail them, an innocent person's not going to think of, well, let's go whack that person. Let's go whack the potential blackmailer. And that was their first response. He calls Katie, and if you don't take care of this, I'll take care of it. You and I, if that happens, we'd be like, my goodness, this person came up to me in the parking lot wanting money for something. I have no idea what they're talking about. Or we would call the law enforcement. We'd say, you know what? Somebody approached me in the parking lot as I'm walking down the street in Miami Beach. What in the world is going on? But their response was, well, let's hire somebody to kill that person. Innocent people don't behave that way.
Karm, this next one is, I'm curious your take on this next one. This one's from Bet, like as in Bette Midler. Her last name is Jordan, Bette Jordan. OMG, oh my God, Charlie and the other Adelsons may get away with murder, which is what Jeremy just alluded to. Do not forget O.J. Simpson and his dream team. Again, Jeremy's saying that they have a very, very competent defense team here. Also, is it possible Katie's silence could be because someone, in quotes, threatened her and suggested she better keep her mouth shut, or her kids and other family members could be next on the hit list? This nefarious family may have other henchmen on staff. Just saying. Karm, to you, do you think the Adelsons, assuming they are convicted of these crimes, would potentially be able to do it again?
I don't.
You don't. It's just too much energy at this point.
And too much. I think the money is running out too.
That too. On to the next.
Why don't you ask that?
Well, because I have a lot to get through here, Jeremy. It's nothing personal. That was more of a psychological angle, so I wanted the therapist's take on it. On to George or Jorge Ferrero. I'm not sure which way you pronounce it. He says, and this is again to what Jeremy was discussing earlier, Charlie is not really wealthy, and he puts that in quotations. In his child support disclosures, he had a net worth of around $3.3 million. Hardly wealthy. So I guess George is not from the same area as you, Jeremy, and different from me as well. But he says, hardly wealthy, but quote unquote mass affluent. After footing his legal bills and that of Katie, he may be significantly poorer. He states that he gave discounts to cash-paying patients, and it would be easy for the IRS to investigate him for tax fraud. So, is this theory that he's incredibly wealthy? Can it? The defense, it's the defense that I guess would want to poke holes in this, right? Because the prosecution would want to portray him as a wealthy guy who had the money to do all this.
Well, there will be some of that. I mean, I think the truth is really there are people that within 2 or 3 degrees of separation in a bar in Miami or Atlanta or even probably Panama City as well, you could find somebody that will kill somebody for $1,000, $5,000. The cost, the price, the value of human life is sometimes cheap in certain circles. So, I mean, it doesn't take $1 million to kill somebody, and it didn't take it in this case. I think the fact that they were going to offer $1 million for Dan to just move on with his life and let Wendy have the children in Miami, I think speaks for itself. There's always going to be some ambiguity between somebody's income for tax purposes when you're claiming a lot of expenses. You may look poorer on paper, but the fact is he was the kind of guy that spent money at clubs, probably had $1,000, $2,000 bar tabs, and the state can get evidence of that if that's an issue. But if the fact is he certainly had the resources to pay $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 to the players involved in this, and certainly it accounts for the evidence that we have of the payments. He had things, intangible property like the car that was given to Katie. So he had enough to get this done. I don't really see that as a true weakness with the state's case.
And you said, in discovery, the prosecution would be able to obtain credit card receipts and things of that nature.
They would if they've not already done so, and certainly they may want. That might be one of the things they're working on now. To go back to your earlier question, to kind of shore up, something that the defense did attack a lot in the last 2 trials was, you have certain evidence of payments, but you may not be able to account for all of the finances of Katie and other people. I think the state did a pretty good job of that, but they may want to do more to give a full picture of the finances, to kind of deal with those.
Not only Charlie's money. Donna was paying Katie McBanua from the office.
Correct.
So it's not only Charlie's money, it's also Donna's.
And Harvey's.
Harvey. Well, how do you read Harvey? May I ask you?
Oh, well, I mean, I think he sort of went along for the ride. I mean, I think he doesn't really control the family situation. I think that's Donna, who, you could call the matriarch of the family. It's Wendy. These are the dominant people. Charlie. Whether or not he was in favor of this or enthusiastic about it or kept in the dark about it, he doesn't have the power to really do anything about it.
If I hear 2 people discussing that they're going to murder somebody and I know about it, am I not legally bound to notify the authorities?
No, and that's one thing that Wendy could ultimately defend herself in, because even if she knew something was happening or had an inkling, to be an accessory, you have to take an affirmative step to further the conspiracy or to cover it up. Of course, morally, as a matter of conscience, as a matter of faith, if we have that understanding, we should try to protect life. But legally, that's not something somebody can be criminally charged. And that's why it's tough to prosecute Charlie, but even tougher to prosecute Wendy, just for that reason. She could say, well, you know what? Y'all are correct. When I was sitting in the interview with Mr. Isom, I put 2 and 2 together. I figured it out, and it shocked me as much as anybody. And she could say, you know, I figured it out, but I had no part in it. I didn't do anything to help it. And she could technically be acquitted.
Let's run through some more, because the audience really deserves it. They're really riveted and they're engaged. So I want to get through some more of these. This one is from ADF. That is the person's name. She or he says, they're all guilty and will all serve time. There are too many coincidences, and I believe there's a lot more evidence. Question is, what is taking so long? Also, who was looking out for the boys? I believe that obviously Wendy is looking out for the boys. Side note, I think Luis Rivera was trying to help his friend Sigfredo by saying the feds know everything and trying to get him to turn so he wouldn't get life in prison. Luis can see through Katie, but I believe he genuinely cares for Sigfredo. Also, I'm thinking they saw Wendy on the first trip, not the second trip. Is this possible? Excellent episode with awesome guests who now include Jeremy Mutz, and the wiretaps are my drug of choice. So just back to the first line here. They're all guilty and will all serve time. Jeremy, you probably say not so fast, right?
Yeah, it's never good to try to predict what a jury will do. There's never guaranteed. Now, I'm certainly rooting for the state in this, and I hope that they do. But it's going to be a tough fight that Georgia has, and Ms. Dugan and whomever else they may have join them as this goes forward. And they may stop with Charlie. That's a likely possibility. They may say, we've got the trigger man, we've got the driver, we got the person that orchestrated it, and we've got the person that set it in motion. And they could say, well, we don't have enough to go forward, and it stay right there. Politically,
our audience is booing right now. This next one.
I also hear them booing.
This next one comes from 5Car5. If you listen, this is interesting, I thought. If you listen to Wendy's interrogation, she tells on herself without realizing it. From the beginning, Wendy refers to Dan being shot by someone that hated him, or someone mad at him, or someone out to get him. She never considers a robbery gone bad. She never asked if anything was stolen. Maybe they were trying to steal his car. Was the house ransacked? She said in the police car going to the police station, she wondered if someone was trying to frame her. Frame her for what? She said she was sure the Markels would think she shot Dan. Again, never considering any other crime but someone that hated Dan. She proved her guilt that day. Jeremy?
Well, as someone, I've kind of had to study that video, and it's taken me watching it maybe 2 or 3 times for a change. When I first watched it, when I first talked to people that knew her, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. But seeing it subsequently, and then seeing her performance at the trial most recently, my opinion of it changed. I think there's a number of things in that interrogation that indicate somebody who is acting in their emotions, and didn't ask about her children being safe, I think, because she, of course, knew they were fine. And as the viewer mentioned there, I think there's a number of things in her demeanor and the things that she talked about, just extremely calculated. And I think you look at how she wore the same outfit in the next trial, it's all too calculated. And an innocent person typically is just going to respond to events. And then you could also look at just the fact that even if I'm divorced from someone, or bitterly divorced, if they're the parent of my children, my attitude is going to be, and most people's attitude is going to be, what can I do to help? Even I think if it's my own family, that's the father of her children that were murdered, and you never hear something from her to help assist the prosecution. It's always circling the wagons, more and more so over the years, to circle the wagons to protect, the family. And so my opinion has changed, and I've had to watch that video more than once to try to glean from it what the truth may actually be.
It's interesting how there are all these interpretations. The next comment is from TWS, and we'll wrap this up shortly. This is kind of interesting, and this also goes back to something Jeremy said earlier. Has there ever been a case where someone's immediate family planned a hit on the ex-spouse and father to their children without any knowledge or involvement from the other ex-spouse themselves? It's a good point. You ever hear of a spouse putting out a hit without any knowledge from the other side of the family? Have you heard of that?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, that would be very rare. I mean, I think there's a degree to which the perpetrators would try to compartmentalize and wall off the spouse, and I think they did that in this case as well. But I'm not aware of any where that occurs, and they're just sort of the unknowing, unwitting beneficiary of somebody else's plan.
This next one is from Maya. When Wendy was being questioned the day of Dan's murder, she insisted on calling the host of the Stock the Bar party. That was the Bullet Bourbon party. Yet she did not call the Markels, which are her son's grandparents, and tell them the worst news they will ever hear. Karm. She called the host of the party, but not Ruth and Phil Markel. Is that evidence of guilt in and of itself?
Of major callous insensitivity, at least.
In other words, if my wife, the beautiful Ileana, called a party host and not you, would you be wondering if she was guilty of something?
I think that the fact she was at war with them probably before, and hated them, and didn't have enough compassion after their son was murdered to call them up.
Back to 5 Car 5, Jeremy. I'm fascinated by, number one, how invested our audience is, but also how intelligent they are. 5 Car 5 writes, Wendy lied on the stand about turning onto Trescott, which is the street that Dan lived on. The cop said she didn't even come to a stop, but sped off when she drove a short way down Trescott and saw the barricade. That day, at that time, Wendy just happened to try to drive by Dan's house. She said she thought a tree had fallen, and that was the reason for the barricade. Why would she not question what was going on? Because she knew what had happened.
You know, there is this, I don't know if it's an American expression or if it's an international, the criminal always returns to the place of the crime. Did you ever hear that?
Oh, sure. And you could add to that, they always add one detail too many because they think they're clever. And I think, maybe that Trescott Drive was maybe one piece too many. I think the TV repair and some of the other things they calculated to be pretty good, pretty slick. That might have been just that one little detail that starts to hurt them when you start to put it all together and think, well, she's really calculated this story for that day.
This one again from 5 Car 5. This guy's on point. I'm not sure if this is public record. I have not heard this. I'm curious if you have, Jeremy. 5 Car writes, Harvey told his CPA, his accountant, to get his affairs in order because his lawyer told him the family might get arrested. Harvey had property put into trust to protect the family assets. Harvey's accountant should be questioned in court about what else Harvey told him. Karm, this fixes your Harvey fascination. And Jeremy, have you heard about this?
I believe I heard that on Fancy Fictions, some of her content. I've not heard that directly myself. But it all goes into the pieces of the puzzle of what was going on.
And
Yeah.
go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry.
Well, and I think that's just some of the things that the state may be trying to put together now.
I'm so intrigued. I don't know why, but I'm fascinated by the workflow and how they do this, because there's so much information. Like I would just be so overwhelmed. Like, do they put up flow charts and stuff? I mean, like they have like a dry erase board where they map this all out.
Well, some do. Law enforcement, when they're investigating a case like this, can. Individual attorneys, it just depends on their style. Some may sketch something out. Some may put together binders. They're all a little bit different, but it is a lot of information. I mean, it is overwhelming, and it takes a team of or 3 or 4.
It takes a village.
In the TV, in the TV crime scenes, there is all these charts on a whole wall, and so forth. And those are small fries compared to this one.
And we have one final comment, my personal favorite. No offense to our other audience members and viewers, and this one comes from Joetta Flyascanby. That can't be a real last name. Flyascanby. Maybe it can be. And her comment is, all caps, love Carmen! Exclamation.
My name is Carmela. But
Carmela.
But that's okay.
So it's close enough. She loves you, Karm.
Well,
We call you Karm.
Well, that's okay. You can make a mistake as long as you love me.
Jeremy, your very interesting perspective. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed your time on the show. What's the name of your firm for people up in North Florida that are in trouble?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's Law Office of Jeremy Mutz, so it's not a very creative name there. But I enjoy being a guest. I'm honored to be with you, and I've enjoyed all the hard work that y'all have done, and I enjoy your analysis on this case. I think it really brings something valuable to it. And, again, I think podcasts like this have helped keep the case going. I think they've maybe helped some other cases in Tallahassee that are unsolved get a little bit closer to being solved as well.
I agree, and I know you know a lot of other unsolved cases in Tallahassee, which we will get to. Remember, hashtag Justice for Dan Markel, and if you guys want to get our newsletter, I'm going to put Jeremy Mutz on that distribution list. Please drop it into the YouTube comments. Jeremy, appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and Karm will once again extend the show. Karm,
but you forgot to say you will let him have let.
We will obviously let him know, Karm. The show should be called The Last Word with Carmela Waldman. Jeremy, it was a pleasure and an honor. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot. Very informative and different perspective.
Have a good evening.